Welcome to In the Hunt podcast. We will bring clarity to the complex game of golf. Start your path to better play today. This is Brian Bailey from Charlottesville, Virginia, and I'm joined with Mark Sweeney from Windermere, Florida. And we welcome you to the hunt. Welcome to this edition of In the Hunt. I'm Brian Bailey. I'm here in Charlottesville, Virginia, home of the University of Virginia, as well as we have Mark Sweeney, a graduate from the University of Virginia. Mark, how are we doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm excited about today's topic because I've always loved data and databases and data analytics, and so this is right up my alley.
Awesome. Today's guest, we have William Scher. We'll call him Bill throughout this interview. He is a professor at the University of Virginia. He's the director of the AMP program, which is Accelerated Master's Degree Program, associate chair inside of Engineering Systems, author, genuine good guy, and to be fair, I would call a friend. Our families have grown up in the Earlysville area. Our daughters have been friends for many years, so I'll never forget. This is kind of a funny story before we drag Bill in here is we first started talking about Game Forge at a bowling alley for my daughter's birthday when the Shears took on the Baileys in bowling. That was our first conversation that kind of got us together. And then, here we are a couple years later, not younger, not better looking, but we are here a couple years later. So, Bill, you want to jump on in here and say hello?
Yeah, hey, great. It's good to say hello to everyone. Looking forward to this. Looking forward to learn something myself, too. It's always interesting when you bring the sport together with the data. So I'm looking forward to this. Interesting, great topic. I think it's a exciting topic that's only growing in the future as we move forward.
Yeah, as a system engineer, as in systems for engineering at UVA, a lot of big data projects. Where do you see the crossroads of sports analytics and golf, sports as general, and big data? How is big data helping, and maybe even taking pieces away or making things more challenging?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been working in the kind of sports analytics for many years. And for example, I developed a play calling system for George Welsh in the 90s that he used for a couple seasons there that we pulled together data to look at all. And the data was pulled off film, and it took months to collect the data and build it. It's shocking compared to what we can do now when I work with a football team, how much faster and responsive we can be now. So things are moving very fast. Sports, it's supposed to grow to a $5 billion industry in the next year or two. Sports analytics, it's growing. At the University of Virginia, we're trying to stand up a sports analytics center here. So we think it's exciting. It's very interesting when you look at the sports analytics conferences that are out there, like the MIT Sports Analytics in Michigan and some other ones that are out there. They've really been focusing on initially a lot of football, baseball, basketball, kind of the big revenue sports, and in terms of college, the big revenue sports. And we're starting to slowly see it work its way into other sports, and the work we're doing with you on golf, and you're seeing it slowly into tennis and other sports. Some sports I talk with coaches at UVA, and there's virtually no analytics. So I think we're at this kind of great stage of this business where there's opportunity, which in some baseball now has been really it's getting kind of deep now. And so the opportunity in baseball is a lot less than it was, 5 years ago. The statistics that they're collecting now per pitch, per game, and the actual positioning on the field, they're tracking the ball, down to the millimeter where the ball is going on the field, spins, rotations, hundreds and hundreds of fields of data on every pitch. And so baseball is really kind of at the forefront. Basketball is getting there too. Football is slowly catching up, and then there's a whole bunch of other great sports that really haven't gotten there yet, which is interesting to me because there are opportunities there. I think the work we're doing with you in golf is one of the low-hanging fruit opportunities. Lots of great data, but folks aren't really looking at it in the kind of, to me, the systems approach to looking at the data. Running track is interesting. We're talking with a rowing coach. Interesting. They're collecting data. For example, a lot of rowing clubs, they use sensors and they collect heart rate data, but they really don't know what to do with it. In my last couple of years, I've worked with field hockey. We've worked with lacrosse. We've worked with volleyball, football, softball, and all these sports. It's slowly starting to emerge. Softball was an interesting work we did with the UVA softball team, looking at the data that comes out of the pitch. They have devices they put at the end of the bat, and they record about 15 fields of data on every swing that the athlete does when she's swinging in practice. They can't use those sensors in the game. But it was very interesting looking at that data. We were looking at the product that they use to evaluate the quality of a batter, and it really had no correlation whatsoever with the actual performance of the batter. And so we're trying to actually look and say, what do you really care about? What's
That
the
sounds
metric
familiar, doesn't it, Brian?
And it's like these companies are selling stuff and you're just looking at the data saying, we've got 2 years of data and the performance of the athletes isn't matching up with your metrics at all. And so are you really measuring the right thing? And for softball, it came out to some interesting things that were just the kind of not quite the Moneyball statistic of softball, but I think it's closer to that. And I think there's a lot of things we're seeing that that are very interesting, where it's again it's nascent and at the cusp of really maybe some interesting discoveries. And again, baseball now is now at the marginal rates of stuff. They've mined so much of the low hanging fruit. Right, 15 years ago we learned about OPS and said, wow, it's getting less and less margin to add to on that, because they've really gone deep in that. But all these other sports, it's exciting. So UVA, we're trying to get a sports analytics center going. We're trying to add things like sports analytics majors and minors eventually, so students can look at the broad piece of sports analytics. And just the sports analytics to us is performance, health, and business or operations. So there's really three aspects of sports analytics. So a lot of it's the business piece: yield management, operations, marketing, and then there's the health, all the health issues on sports, and then there's the actual performance, looking at performance of teams and athletes.
Interesting. Bill, do you find that kind of the flow is that, the big money sports get the attention first, right? But the data science starts with data capture, and then it takes longer for the analytics to show up. Like ShotLink's been out there for over 10 years, for a while now. They were very early in golf. They're the first people in golf to go out there and collect a very detailed data set. Which is difficult in golf, because golf, unlike other sports, is spread out across a big field. It's spread out over a couple miles. It's not in a stadium with controlled weather and controlled circumstances. There's different weather conditions, different pin positions, different wind, different setups, different everything. And so it's a lot of work to capture the data. But the PGA Tour itself didn't really do any data analytics on the data. They just captured it. And then other third parties have come in more and more over time. Is that kind of the normal flow, where you've got to get the data first, and then there's a lag between the time where you really get the insight into the data?
Yes, I think I was shocked when I started working with you and Brian about the amount of golf data. When you look at the data you provide us with, I was stunned at how much data there is. And then, as you said, the opposite of that is the analysis on that data has been incredibly limited. I mean, when you have things like you have all kinds of wind and temperatures and all kinds of course specific, what kind of grass and the height of grass, and then all the kind of the tremendous, phenomenal amount of data. And again, I think you're right. The analytics are lagging on that. People doing stuff, and again, it's where do people perceive an opportunity there? There's a lot of sports that don't have anything close to your data. That we work with some sports that they're virtually it's in a coach has an Excel sheet with a couple of sheets where the data is. That's where a lot of sports are right now. Golf is way ahead of the curve with data, but again, they don't have you're exactly right. They don't have the analytics yet. No one is really looking at that data. I don't think, from what you've told us, we've been looking at it and just shocked at the value and the depth of that data, which is a blessing and a curse. It's so much data. It's hard to kind of figure out what we really need from that. And I think what you've done at Game Forge, trying to isolate down to key metrics, is critical, because there's too much data. That is a unique thing in sports, though. I think so. The other sports will lag. They'll start getting the data, and then the analysis will follow. Again, will lag to that when people can actually use that data to reach some kind of insight into the sport. There's multiple levels of insight. I use a case in my class, the Moneyball case I've used since for 15 years now. I was a big Bill James fan in the 70s. I've been getting his abstract since 1974. I've been a huge fan of his. He identified it 30 years ago. The sport took another 20 years to realize he was right. But the idea there is that statistic is kind of shockingly interesting to me, is that you can look at the last very simple data in an Excel sheet and derive that OPS is the key statistic in an Excel sheet very easily. So that was a case where they didn't need the data to actually discover the insight. They didn't need big data. It's actually Excel. The case I give them team and player data, just very small Excel sheets for the last 10 seasons. And they can say, if they know nothing about the sport, I say, you want better players. They all derive OPS, even if they've never seen the sport, because that's kind of one of the simple ones. Whereas other things I think are going to be a lot deeper. Golf, to me, is actually more complex to get down to the depth. I don't think there's a Moneyball stat sitting out there, just a simple number that like Oakland A's grabbed onto. I don't think golf has that, but golf has the rich data. So I think all the sports right now are in different places, so radically different in data, and that some teams, virtually nothing. And other teams have a lot of data, but they don't know what to do with it. Football is pretty data rich. The film, they extract data from the film. UVA, for an example, as many colleges, buys PFF, Pro Football Focus, data on their football, which gives 100, 200 columns of data on every play. Tremendous amount of data on every play. And they score every player on every team in college football on every play. So incredible data now is emerging with football. I would say right now, the analysis on that data is pretty elementary right now. And it's the same as the golf, is they don't, even though football is a giant revenue sport professionally in collegiate, they don't have, I don't think they have the insights yet really of how to use that to its fullest. So I think they're kind of similar to golf. Probably more people are looking at it than golf, though, on the football side. And other teams, as I mentioned, one of my former students is an Olympian, track Olympian, uses virtually no analytics. Coach, they go out and run, they time you and do some more runs, and they have a training regimen they use, but virtually zero analytics. So I think it's the amazing diversity of what's happening in sports right now is there's no single, we're all doing this together. It's all over the map.
Nice. And if you like, baseball, definitely cutting edge. They've been, baseball's been the statistical gold mine ever since baseball started, with box scores all the way through. But now in basketball, you can see analytics is everywhere from, now they're actually pulling players in minutes, trying to save them throughout the year. Football, like you said, is really expanded. Even the Dallas Cowboys hired their new coach, and he supposedly said he sat out for a year, and all he did is learn more analysis and learn more big data on how he could become a better coach. So where do you see the bridge from coaches? So a bunch of coaches that are listening to this, and that bridge in understanding data science and being able to apply that. That's a completely, you talk about how data is broken down, but we as a coach, how could we start to utilize big data and trying to get people better?
I think that's the biggest gap by far, is getting from, we have people that can look at the data and kind of do good things with it. We have the data in some places, but that bridge, Brian, is the huge void right now. And it turns out it's coach by coach, team by team. When I've talked to a couple collegiate teams, for example, football, and I tell them, I said, look at the things we can do. We've done stuff that I've developed on recruiting where we can identify top recruits. We can identify hidden gem recruits using massive amount of data we use. And it's very, very accurate from my experience from validating, cross-validating that data. So we say that. And then the answer I often get back from football programs is, I say, well, you need to hire a data scientist and they can help you with this. And the answer is, we can't afford that. So a team that's paying, some collegiate team may be paying, millions of dollars in coach's salary, and said, we can't afford a data scientist for $200K a year that could help elevate our team. And so to get that understanding or appreciation, say, wow, that actually, and to get that. So often if you can demonstrate, I think with UVA football, we've been able to demonstrate, look at, we can identify the recruits. We have a model. We generate the probability a recruit will come to UVA in their junior year of football. And that model is 94% accurate. We can tell you what juniors are coming to UVA. And that helps them figure out where to put their resources. And the coaching staff can say, look, this guy has got a 2% chance of coming to UVA football. Let's either write him off or we have to put a full press. We have to go after him. But that's a choice they can make with the insight of whether that student athlete's going to come to UVA or not. So the gap there is just tremendous. We've had coaches that I've worked with that said, I don't see any use in data. I don't think we don't really need it. It kind of goes a little bit back to the Moneyball story. I think better told in the book, in my opinion, a great book that the author wrote. Is that the culture was kind of, hey, I know a good player when I see him. I know a good football player when I see him. I know a good golfer when I see her. I don't need any data. Don't tell me that stuff. And I think a lot of coaches still have that mentality. And Oakland had to fight that mentality. Oakland A's in that interesting story to get, wait a second, let's not replace coaches' expertise, wisdom, which is incredible. Let's augment it with data and information. And I think that's the mistake. I developed a lot of medical diagnostic systems in the 80s and 90s. And the doctors had considerable fear about those medical systems, big medical informatics systems, would help them use AI to help them figure out treatment strategies. They were terrified that it was the goal of us was to replace the doctor. And the answer for that was absolutely not. The goal was to augment the doctors. They have all kinds of wisdom and insights and holistic and experience that we cannot replicate on the machine. But the data models can help augment their decision making, and that's what we have to kind of convince coaches. We're not trying to replace your judgment, your wisdom, your field, calling plays. We're not saying that you have so much more subtle stuff that you know and see. You can look in the eyes of a guy running off the field in the football field and say he's not going to make that kick, or you have some wisdom that we can't put into the models, but the models can help augment you. In football, for example, it's been years to get coaches to understand they punt way too often. The data it slaps you in the face. They punt way too often. And so to get them to accept that and say, hey, here's a recommendation. Your expected yards gained is twice as much if you go for it than if you punt. They're still going to use their intuition to make that decision based on other things they can bring in. They know the wind just came up. They know it started raining. The model may not have that in it. So Brian, Mark, I think it's a hard bridge to make, and it's almost sport by sport, coach by coach, when the coaches actually can appreciate that. George Welsh, I think, appreciated the stuff we did in the 90s as a sample coach. I think it really depends on the coach, but if you can convince them with some data, some examples, and get them excited that it can augment them, not replace their decision making, you can get them on board. But right now it's hit or miss on working with coaches. At UVA, we've got a very strong response from UVA coaches, and that could be because the athletic department at UVA, Carla Williams and Ted White, the athletic director and associate athletic director, that really believe in this and believe in analytics and believe in data as a way to augment. They're very interested in addition to performance, which we all are, they're also interested in health. And how do we keep athletes healthy? How do we keep them injury-free? How do we do training regimens and things like that improve quality of performance, but also keep the athletes safe and healthy? So UVA's been very responsive, but it's a hit or miss. So that's the biggest gap. We have the ability, and in many cases we have the data. It's really getting the people to cross that bridge and realize the value of that analysis and get rid of the fear. I think there's fear that the analytics are going to take over the game. If you remember, the baseball player Jason Worth did a tirade summer before last about the pinheads taking over sports and how sports analytics are changing the game. And, the answer to that was, he's right. Sports analytics can change the game. You really have to balance that. If we're going to change what we do in baseball, if we're going to change how we position fielders, whether we bunt or not, if we're going to change football play calling, it actually could change the game. And we have to be careful. Are we changing the game for the better or the worse? It's entertainment, right? Are we making it less entertaining? If we make it too boring, right? If we make, hey, it's so boring, I can call the plays at home because I have the same system the coach does and I know what they're going to do, and now it's boring. And so we have to be careful of that. So I agree that bridge is tough. There's fear in the bridge to cross it. There's fear of, is it going to replace me? There's fear, is it going to change the game? So there's all these things to balance. And right now, it's a big gap that's being crossed gently and only in a few places, as far as I can see.
Yeah, culturally, it's very hard. That's usually the biggest roadblock that I've come across, especially in golf, is culturally, golf's a very slow-moving ship and very slow to adapt change. And they've gotten better over the years with the data sensors and the swing sensors and the radars and things like that. But most coaches are not data analysts, and they don't want to be data analysts, and that's fine. And they're also risk averse. If they're doing well enough doing what they're doing, it's a big risk to go out there and try something totally different. But, like the Oakland A's, somebody's going to come in there and flip the model upside down. And then, I think it probably takes an event like that to get everybody else to pay attention, to go out, somebody goes out there and flips the model and gets their butt kicked. You know what I mean? Or kicks everybody else's butt. And then everybody goes, uh-oh, we just lost all competitive advantage we have. We need to get on board with this. Otherwise we're going to be behind the ball. Do you think, do you think other environmental factors like, gambling coming into golf is obviously a big legislative factor that's kicking in, that I think there's going to be so much money behind data analytics for gambling that the data capture will get better. And once the data capture gets better on, every other tour other than PGA Tour and European Tour, there's not much data at all, especially LPGA. Do you think an outside factor like that can change the data capture, and then eventually the lag catches up, and then we'll have it a little more widespread across golf?
I think so. I think the whole esports and his money's going to flow into that stuff. I know at the MIT Sports Analytics Conference, my first time I went, where I think it was the first or second year of the conference, I don't think esports and that whole aspect even existed. And it was 60% of the conference last time. And so it's taken over. So I think, yes, that's going to motivate people. People building their team. I'm building my own, football team or baseball team or basketball team. if I can make money on that by putting together a good team, I want the data, and the data challenges are going to say, hey, if I can there's so many data challenges out there. And if I can spend, my time working on some data challenge about, predicting something, the amount of rainfall in the West or something like that, or I can spend it on esports and actually make some money on it. I think you're going to see, I think it will follow. The analytics will follow, tremendously will follow. So I think that's going to be a huge game changer in the data. I fear it's going to change it a little bit. So many of these teams now where, everybody has their own team and they're more interested in the individual. That's going to be an interesting dynamic to me. I don't know where that's going, about how that's going to change team sports, where all I care about is my team, which is, I don't care about the Philadelphia Eagles. I care about Carson Wentz because he's my quarterback. And so that's may change how the whole yield and revenue model. I mentioned in sports analytics, there's three things, right? Health, performance, and business, and the yield and the money and the management, and all that stuff is huge. Interesting. I saw an interesting statistic. The biggest money maker in the last 20 years in football are the Cowboys, heads and shoulders above everyone else as far as making money for the owners. And they haven't won a title in 20 years. And so there's teams that have won tons of titles and are making less money. So if you're an investor, do you want to be behind the Cowboys or the Patriots? Well, you're making a lot more money if your money was in the Cowboys. And so the question becomes is, as that's going to affect it. The whole idea as the business side and the money side, and esports is driving is how teams make money. So I think it could change everything. And then the data, I think it will drag along the data availability. It's interesting that golf has created a lot of data the last decade, like you said, I don't know what the driving force has been in golf per se, but they're kind of ahead on, I think, a lot of data. They're getting close to baseball, comparable to baseball and other sports as far as looking at the data you provide. So it's an amazing amount of data. So it's
interesting because golf, and Brian can jump in on this, but golf, right now, most people, all they look at is performance and maybe health a little bit, but the business side and the yield management, I can't think of anything that I've seen other than just standard financial analysis for a golf course. Or it'd be interesting to apply that to a player and say, okay, this player has X number of events. How do you maximize a player's potential based on not only performance, but scheduling and everything else? I don't know if I've ever seen that.
Yeah, I think that's why this sports center I'm conceiving here is that really has those three components, because that's an important component. It's the real world component that has to be there, the financial side. If teams are going to exist, especially this new COVID-19 world, where what kind of fans are there going to be in the future? Without fans, this may be even the esports and all that may be even bigger than ever. It may become even more of a component if the fan engagement, and maybe that's where teams are making their money on things they derive about on those fronts, as opposed to actually people in the stands and watching on TV as much. So that's going to be interesting. On the health side is kind of interesting to me, is because the health side is the other side, performance, business, and health. The health side is kind of interesting because we have to be very careful. The work we're doing at UVA is there's a big controversy over health data and who owns health data and the privacy aspects with health data. There were a couple of players in professional sports in the last 2 years that were released from their teams because health models projected they were going to not be in good health in the future. They were dropped before that was realized, but they forecasted. And so that led to all kinds of arguments. Well, who owns my data? If I'm on a team and they're taking blood work and they're doing this and that, and someone builds a model that forecasts, hey, you're not going to be nearly as good next year because our model shows. I built a model and shows your health is not going to be as good next year. Your performance is going to be way down. We're letting you go. And that was built on data we collected from you, all kinds of health data. Who owns that data? So
like
when
that
we work,
precognition, that Tom Cruise movie, right, Brian?
That's right.
We're going to arrest you before you commit the crime.
Yeah, then that's kind of these players. It was an interesting panel year before last at the MIT conference was 4 players that had been let go on forecasted performance from the models, and they were suing because it begs the question. And so when we work at the collegiate level, when we work with students, is we have to, for example, when we were working with a field hockey team on training regimens, we had to work on a HIPAA compliant server to have the data, to have the student data that we were actually looking at, their heart rate data they use polar sensors. And so we had all this heart rate data that we had from the students. That has to be on a HIPAA compliant server. You just can't put that into your Excel sheet and start playing with it or put into your big data model. But once you're on a HIPAA compliant server, the rules, it's an amazing jump in restrictions, requirements, managing that data, the publishing of that data. And so that's where we hit this whole idea. If I'm going to start using your data for health and performance, who owns that data, and how is that data used? And there's interesting things. I mentioned this, I think I mentioned both of this to you. I mean, the work we did at field hockey, there's all kinds of different rules and regulations that the NCAA comes down with. On the UVA side, on the UVA field hockey team, as an example, we are not allowed to ask or know the girls on the field hockey team their weight. So we're not allowed to ask it, and we don't know it. Well, who cares?
Dangerous question anyway.
Yeah, who cares? But it turns out the heart sensor, it's an important input into the heart sensor to analyze the output of the heart sensor data. So now I can't have a critical piece of data. I need to actually interpret your heart rate data, your heart rate variability, and your heart rate data. I can't have that information. And so I've got to guess your weight. And it turns out it's very sensitive to that. So these kind of things, these other issues about privacy, ethics, security of data, I think are going to become, I would say, I bet you a lot of schools right now have private HIPAA protected data that coaches are just looking at on their laptops. And that's going to break out to where people are going to say, whoa, wait a second, on the health side and even on the performance side. For an athlete, if I'm doing a bunch of medical tests for my college football players and my pro players, again, who owns that data and who can forecast and build models off that data? So the complexity, because it's so nascent and all this stuff is just coming out now, I think a lot of these issues are going to emerge in the next, the next decade about these, how we do sports analytics, how we monetize it, how we do that. Is it from gambling and esports? How do we do that? And then all these kind of issues of ethics, privacy issues, and I think it's all gonna kind of evolve, because right now I think most people haven't even gotten to that question yet. Like I said, I bet you a lot of coaches haven't even asked that question yet. They're looking at all your data and making a decision about you, and not even realizing those other dimensions, those broader dimensions of ethics and privacy, and who owns the data.
So as we circle back, we talked about fear of big data. I think that's, there's buzzwords out there all the time, and it's really perpetuated by Hollywood, right? There's AI, there's machine learning, there's this, there's that. And I think us as a small startup analytic company, and then you working in much bigger systems, has data science done a good job in trying to remove that fear by saying that AI is not a robot that's going to come and take over the world tomorrow? But again, how can we bridge that gap for the coach that's like, oh, I'm not sure, I don't want this. In Game Forge, we're like their silent assistant. We sit to the side and we show them areas that they might not see. Maybe it'll take them a couple of weeks to find it. Maybe we can show it to them in a matter of moments. So how could we as a company be better, and how could data science be better in kind of reducing that fear for coaches, society at large?
Right. So the first part of the question to me is that bridging that gap to you for like golf and your company is obviously it to me is all the work we do behind the scenes. If we use a random forest model to do blah, 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 and come up with some advanced model that does something, that's got to be translated into a simple visual. Not that the coaches are simple or the players are simple, but it's got to be translated into a simple visual that really makes it clear to that coach or what it is. So that's the human computer interface, the human machine interface. That's critical, because if too many data scientists don't get this, they're trying to now, but realizing just that translation from the depth, the in-depth machine learning, AI, all that technical data science work to the coach, it's got to be something very simple. We were working with some football stuff. It's fascinating because if you look at, for example, Pro Football Focus on the football side, when they give a coach a data sheet for every opponent before they play, and it's 50 pages of statistics. Oof. I looked at it, I couldn't even figure out anything. So we took that 50 pages and boiled it into a one-page visual with 4 diagrams on it. So here, coach, here's your opponent. Here are the key things you need to know about your opponent.
The old data dump model, right?
And
Just
so
data on people.
Pro Football Focus has done a phenomenal job of collecting high-end quality data. I mean, I think I have an ultimate respect for the company, but that translation is something a coach can use is still being worked on. And I think the same thing with golf with GameForge is translating things into stuff that the coaches. And again, not because coaches or players aren't smart. It's just you've got to translate it into their language and something that they use and understand. So I think that's the phenomenal part. And some of the things we've talked about is how do you visualize, where do I stand as a golfer, as a number 100 player? Where do I stand versus a top 10? Show me what's different and the kind of things we've talked about with GameForge. Show me the action. Show me the drills that are going to get me to where I want to be. So I think that's easier. The other side is the trust of AI, machine learning. I think we constantly, as a society, and I think data scientists are guilty of this, and the big data science companies, which in my mind are things like Facebook and Google and companies like that, are constantly stepping into it, in my opinion, into a landmine there where they're creating things where the public become less and less trustworthy, because you constantly read reports where, oh yeah, turns out, this big company that we use every day on social media really is mining all your data, and they actually are selling it to all your other folks. Or the story that came out about Amazon. This is a public story, came out last week, right? Turns out they were using all the data from what you buy from their competitors to come up with their own products, to kill their own stores that were advertising on their own website. So when people read this and say, hey, they used big data and machine learning and artificial intelligence to figure out how to crush their competitors, it just builds that social distrust. And I think that's constantly happening. There was a large article, a bunch of stories that came out last month or two, that the government's paying a firm to collect every image in the world on every social media to create a global facial recognition database.
We knew that was coming, though, didn't we?
Yeah, and so people, you were talking about science fiction. Yeah, or the Black Mirror. I mean, this stuff is coming. So I think the distrust of AI is actually maybe going in the wrong direction. Mistrust of machine learning AI from the big picture of that, because we see these uses. A lot of the COVID-19 now, they say, well, we're going to track Mark, and we're going to know Mark,
Everybody I'm close to, everybody I'm physically around, right?
Yeah, Mark was in the locker room at the clubhouse with these three people, and he sat next to them on a stool in the club. I mean, that gets scary about the implications of that, trust us, we're not going to use it for anything except COVID. Well,
yeah,
wow.
Darn well they're going to use it for marketing.
Yeah, no one's going to ever have that for marketing. Exactly. No one's going to use that.
Yeah,
no one's going to use that to trace Mark's friends and then use that to now build a network model of where we know every friend of Mark and we're going to start marketing to them. So I think the suspicion on big data and AI is getting worse, in my opinion. So that's one aspect of it. But I think from the bottom up, from the coach's perspective, I think we can present them with easy to understand information, like the punting information for football. Hey, look at this. The average yards per gain, when we show them scenarios and say the average yard per gain is double if you actually go for it than if you punt, looking at every college game for the last 20 years. And we have that kind of data to show them. So, hey, but what's hard to convince a lot of people and this is hard for me to understand, hard for a lot of us to understand, is, okay, the average yard per gain is twice as much, but that's a stochastic number. That's a statistical number. I'm not guaranteeing you 8 yards instead of 4 yards. I'm not guaranteeing that.
Right.
That's on average. And so you have to really find out good ways for folks to really understand, what does uncertainty mean in a model? What does it mean that my projection is uncertain? It's better, but it's uncertain. You can only get 1 yard and not get the first down and turn the ball over. So how you present uncertainty is a challenge that's raging in all aspects of the world. We had a seminar yesterday at UVA on how to present uncertainty in weather forecasting, because people say, well, there's an 80% chance it's going to rain tomorrow. What does that mean? Does that mean it's going to rain 80% of the time? Does that mean, what does that mean? And it's really hard to understand uncertainty. So, and that is a global challenge in every business, from weather to terrorism to finance. Everyone faces, how do you really interpret and understand uncertainty? And so coaches are as smart as any other person, but boy, explaining that to them is just as hard as it is to a CEO, just as hard as it is to a hedge fund manager. Of really, how do you understand uncertainty, and what are the implications of uncertainty?
Cool. Hey, Bill, what do you see coming as some of the coolest things in sports analytics or sports data that are coming down the line?
Think about that. I think the ability to visualize, to think of ways to really visualize the insights is, I think, one of the critical things that's coming, and it's still being developed, but it's coming down the road, is really because I mentioned with the PFF data or with the GameForge and the ShotLink data, how do you visualize that in a way that, can actually understand, what that means and the implications of that for decision making. A lot of it is, unfortunately, the grunt work of just taking the data and working and really understanding what it means. And a lot of times I believe we have big data. We have big data in golf. We have big data in basketball. But the translation of that big data into something, we call it, and when I teach, I call it decision significance versus statistical significance. The translation, okay, those two players are statistically different in some way. What does that translate into decision? How do I really take that into a decision? A lot of the data science, to me, people really focus on the coding, Python, R, building very sophisticated ensemble forecasting models. The harder part is to translate that output into a decision that is meaningful and usable and valuable to a coach. And that's where the big gap exists right now, is how do I turn that into a meaningful decision? I saw in basketball now, they're tracking some of the players. They're tracking them in 3 dimensions, so they can say, player X, is jumping 1 millimeter less. His height this game was 1 millimeter less than the last game. Okay. I don't know, maybe changed his shoes. Who knows? And how do we use that data? So the data and all the shot link data we have is in all the greens data that you have, right? All the detailed greens data, shot data, player data. Translating that, and I think that's what you're trying to do at GameForge, and I think I support that 100%, is how do you really translate that? Tell me, I'm a player. What do I do?
Yeah, that's always the last question is always, okay, so what do I do now? That's always what they're looking for. What's the answer?
And that's the hardest part. I mean, it's easy. I was telling, I give an example to a group yesterday that about 15 years ago, I built a model for an organization, and it took me almost 6 to 9 month range to build that model, to get the data, to format the data, build the models, do everything, and deliver a recommendation to that client. I did something similar last week in 30 minutes because of the tools I have now that I didn't have. I mean, I built a sophisticated ensemble machine learning model in 30 minutes. I didn't have those tools. 15 years ago, I was weeks just working those tools and hand doing a lot of the stuff that we do now. But that gap of, okay, I've got all those incredible tools now, and that's what we tend to teach is tool building and Python and R, and we build all that stuff. We do a much less quality job, in my opinion, is how to translate that into the decision. So we're very good on predictive modeling, but translating that into the decision context and the decision significance is where we're still faltering, I think, a lot, is how do I really use that? And that's what you're struggling with GameForge. And I think you're doing a great job of really trying to translate that data and information into something that a coach, a player can use, whether they be a weekend golfer, whether they be a college or collegiate or professional golfer. So that's what I think you're doing a great job in. And that's where the gap is, as opposed to giving them, here's 300 pages of statistics, go at it. Instead giving them, here's 3 graphics. These are the 3 things you need to do. And what do you need to do about that? These are the 23 drills that will help you achieve that. And by the way, the things we were looking at, you need to do that drill at least 50 times before you're going to be proficient at that. So how many times do I need to do that drill? What kind of accomplishment do I need in that drill? But that's the kind of thing I think a golfer wants. And I think you've been able to translate that as GameForge into the right question that the golfer cares about. A lot of times we do a bad job in engineering and in data science is really, what does the user really need? We get lost in the data. So the big data is a great thing to have big data. Big and bigger and bigger data. The question is, how do you action off that? Saw a talk on COVID-19. UVA is leading a lot of the COVID-19 model, our Biocomplexity Institute, creating terabytes of data a day. Okay, on the COVID, the Biocomplexity Institute models 323 million people in America. Every one of those is an individual in their database, modeled by where they live and how they move, using all the census data. And it takes effectively 500 years running on multiple cores to run. But the question is, okay, now translating that into a decision and policy is a hard, I can run anything and I can run all kinds of models, but translating that really into policy is a lot harder. And so what do they really need to translate that? What does Brian need to do when he goes to the grocery store? Does it matter if he's 6 feet? Should he be 8 feet? Should he wear a mask? Should he not wear a mask? Does it matter if Brian gets his hair cut? All those kind of questions really are what we really want to know. Just like a golfer really wants to know, okay, show me where my in measurable correct things, where my core weaknesses are, and tell me what I need to do to fix that. And that's what a golfer needs. That's what you want in COVID-19, same question. But that translation from big data and very sophisticated machine learning AI into that decision is a huge gap that still exists, in my opinion, right now.
Well, that's exciting because what I took from that is I'm the wild card here because I'm the big dummy in this group. So if you can portray it and make me understand it, we got a chance.
Yeah, and I mean, experts, every domain experts, be it golf, be it medicine, be it terrorism, be it marketing, whatever you are, I mean, they have such domain knowledge and experts, and so how do you present them knowledge that they can understand that's usable in their format? Anybody, Brian, you could learn all this stuff, but your time is better spent doing what you do. It's better spent what you do.
I don't
I
really
mean,
know what that is, but
Yeah, I haven't figured that out yet.
when we figure that out, you should be doing that. But right now, your time is best spent really, I mean, doing that. Right? Doctors shouldn't be learning data science. Doctors should be practicing medicine and helping patients. And so we should provide them with information, insights that augment their decision making. And so that should be the goal of what we're trying to do, not replacing them, not telling them what to do, not having them say, oh, by the way, I've got some good stuff. If you take a year and learn data science, you'll be able to use the information I give you. That's pretty useless too, I think.
Yeah.
So trying to bridge that gap is you guys said it right at the beginning. That is the huge translation from all the analysis to the decision maker.
Mark, we're at about 45 minutes here. Do you have anything to wrap this up with?
No, I mean, I love data science. I love everything Bill's doing. I can't get enough of it, frankly. And what I love is that golf, again, they're in that gap between where they do have a fairly large amount of data, but not a lot of analysis done. And hopefully we'll be getting more data from the other tours as well. So I think we're in a good position to really get some great insight out of that. And that to me is super exciting.
No, yeah. Like I said, thank you, Bill, for your time today. It's been great.
My pleasure. It's been fun. Working with GameForge.
Yeah, that's right. Go by GameForge. But we appreciate you being here. Thank you, everybody, for joining the hunt today. If you want to find out more information about engineering at UVA, you can definitely look up Bill's faculty profile. He's got tons of resources there, and he's a very accomplished dude, unlike me, who's just kind of a giggling golf coach. What do I know? But thank you guys again for being part of us. And if you have any questions or concerns, keep those coming through Instagram. We'll try to meet your needs inside of future podcasts. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great talking.